Hello, Warwick.
Hello, Nicole. G'day, listeners. Welcome to Comedy Central, Tradies in Business.
Oh, you just raise the bar so high every time you make some sort of statement like that. And I come into here feeling like I'm not good enough already because I've got to Google the joke.
No,
2 minutes.
I've just gone in and validated you even more.
Yes, you do a good job of that. No, you don't. All right. What did the fisherman say to the magician?
No.
Pick a cod. Any cod.
Welcome to the Tradies in Business podcast with your hosts Warwick Bidwell and Nicole Cox. Divert your phone and grab a brew as Waz and Nick unpack tips, tales, secrets and stuff-ups from guests both inside and outside your trade, helping educate and inspire you to break the cycle of gut-busting and money stress and create a true trade business.
Was he from New York?
He could have been.
Good God. Oh, dear. Now I'm trying to think of a segue. Maybe fisherman.
I was thinking
cold water.
Swim in the water.
Yep. Cold water fish. All right. Listeners, we are chatting to somebody on the podcast today who is currently, for those of you that aren't watching YouTube, which is probably 99.9% of you, shaking his head and trying to keep it together and wondering what the heck he has got himself in for this morning, I suspect.
Although I don't know if I'm allowed to ask yet or say anything. I'm like, that was.
Look, we're just gonna
joke.
Just gonna out you, James Tranter, who I refer to as Jimmy. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you.
Don't thank us yet. Now, I've had the pleasure of hanging out with Jimmy before, Coxie, but I didn't have many clothes on. It was really cold. And there was a bunch of half-naked men all mingling around together when I last hung out with Jimmy. So
you missed out, Nick.
It's
going to be an interesting chat today. There's a lot of fripples, put it that way. Now, Jimmy, I don't do bios, and Coxie graciously follows my lead. So you get to do your own, mate. Tell our listeners a bit about who you are. They love to know about the people. So
thank you.
Who are you, Jimmy?
Of course, the hardest question for someone who's generally quite introverted. Who are you and what do you do? The reason...
Make this more painful if you like and just hit you with a bunch of really uncomfortable questions.
I'll just send you links and jokes. No, the reason why you guys were naked when you met me is because we were doing ice baths. And so if the viewers know about this word, Wim Hof, it's a name of a guy who's been quite popular and vocal about the benefits of cold exposure and breath work over the last decades. And I got really into that at some point in my development. And so through the process of, I guess I'd done all the therapy stuff and the mummy daddy work and all that. And then, I knew myself quite well, having done a bit of self-development through my 20s. And then I realized with this Wim Hof stuff, that's actually my body is the kind of like the vehicle, the gateway out of my thoughts, and got really obsessed with it. And then eventually, as you do when you get obsessed with things, like you tick the little box that says, would you like to be an instructor or find out more about how do you share this work? So here I am. And so, yeah, my main modality is doing the Wim Hof stuff, which is in Sydney, mostly ice baths as a cold exposure and doing breath work with people. And, just in the last year or so, expanded out into doing things like ecstatic dance and all kinds of stuff, just to like, whatever it is that gets us out of our heads and into our bodies to just alleviate stress and to find power again. I think it's been a huge thing for me. So that's basically me. But in my normie life, I'm a graphic designer. I'm like a desk worker. I've been that for about 15 years. And I live in Cronulla in Sydney, and I just got into surfing. And I don't know what else. This feels like a date. Tell me some things. What do I say?
I think it's compulsory to surf when you live on the beach in Sydney, isn't it? Isn't it half of the course?
Well, look, you'd be surprised how many people live by the beach and don't surf. And I've been here I think I moved here just before the pandy. So it was like 2020, early 2020. And I just got into surfing in the last year. And it's life-changing. Anyone out there who's like considered picking up a board and they live by the beach, it's just fantastic. I love it.
We did a great podcast episode with Tom Carroll. Tell me I've got the name right. And
Yes, you have.
now I'm second guessing myself as I'm saying it was. Well, he's had quite the journey, but the way he speaks about surfing is really quite transformational just in and of itself. It's really interesting. So I can see how it would be an amazing journey for someone to have. Jimmy, you mentioned you started doing this self-work when you were in your 20s, which seems quite young to me, of the community that I guess I'm part of. Many of them don't start doing a lot of that important work until they're sort of hitting their mid-30s and above.
So
To start that in your 20s is absolutely quite interesting. Can you tell us how you even came to be starting on that journey?
Yikes. Yeah. So I'm quite a cerebral fella, I guess, and I've always been like trying to be better. So anyone who's like always trying to be better and isn't really happy with themselves is always going to be looking at like, how do I do stuff? 30-day challenges. I'm going to join the gym. I heard that you're supposed to do this. You got to meditate. Endless fucking information and podcasts. Or am I allowed to swear? Actually,
You absolutely are.
I don't want to demonetize you or something. Like, I don't know.
Good.
Your listenership just went up, mate.
Yes. Shit fuck. Yeah, so I was already interested in just like, how do I do better? And then it was originally my dad. He went and did this thing called the Landmark Forum, like probably 20 years ago. I don't know if you guys have heard that.
Sure have.
And then he had this conversation with my mom, and they've historically not enjoyed each other. And mum was like, oh, something's different about your dad. He wants to go to do this course. Like, I'll pay for it if you go do it. And we're like, why don't you go do it? It was one of those things. It's like, she'll pay for us to go do it. She won't go do it. But me and my sister went, and I thought it'd be something about, once again, how to be better, how to add more things to your life. That's what I thought, having an interesting life was. How do I be more attractive, make more money, do all these kind of things? And it was more about the inner work. Like, how have you made yourself into who you are, and then pulling that all apart so you kind of become empty at the end of it. You can create whatever you want. And that kind of blew my mind. And so that was the start of the very conceptual kind of like self-development, but I'm pretty slow. Like, I was kind of around that framework for like 5 years and just doing little bits of it. And always wanted to know how to do things like meditating and stuff like that. But I'd sit down for 5 minutes and it would just be a constant barrage of thoughts and irritation. And so it wasn't until I found this Wim Hof method, which was just kind of by chance. I was originally listening to, like, once again, trying to find out about cryptocurrency, because I was like, yeah, I can get ahead. And that was my first foray into listening to podcasts, because before I was like, why would I want to listen to two people talk for 3 hours? That's just sounds like the worst thing ever.
Yes.
And then when it was something really complex, like how does the blockchain work, actually having two people talk about it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think I finished listening to one of those podcasts and I just wanted something else. I was working in the back of my van trying to build a bed in there. And like, you guys, like, I guess your audience is all tradies, but like, I am terrible, it's just like starting out DIY. So there's a lot of time in there driving back and forward from Bunnings, just like sitting in there looking around going like, what do I do next? And so I put on a podcast. And YouTube fed me in like the thumbnail, this like, it was like a guy going like this with a hoodie on, and there was a glacier behind him, and it just looked super masculine. It was like the Iceman's extreme feats of blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I want to listen to this because I think I need some like, I'm sick of the nerd chat. Let's have something cool to like motivate me to be about talking about climbing mountains or whatever. And it was just completely not about that. It was Wim's like super charming kind of Dutch guy, extolling the virtues of like breath work and self-healing, and that's what allows him to do his feats. He does his feats to prove that they're possible, not just to kind of like get some money and be famous. So yeah, that's when I first did the breath work, and that's kind of opened me up like, oh, it's all these things I know about myself are great. I've done therapy, I've done all these things. They make a difference, but it's actually using my body to come back to zero was just like what made it all kind of pop off, and made life really interesting, and like kind of learn how to ride the waves so much rather than over conceptualizing and thinking about stuff. I'm able to make a mess now and be okay with that and come back to go, okay, that was tough. Let's regroup and go back out there again. And if I feel stressed now, I can process that in my body quite quickly. It's just like, I can have a day that's terrible and the next day it's gone because I know how to use this work. So it was that framework of having the mental stuff in the 20s happening, and sometimes that just makes you busier and you just beat yourself on the back with like your knowledge of self or whatever, I'm this way because of this. And I have these tendencies. Ah, shit, what should I do? I got to get my way out of this. This was like, oh, I can use my body to get rid of all that and then start again. And so that's been the beautiful process of specifically the Wim Hof to start, but just like that whole bunch of embodiment practices. And for a designer who sits at a desk all day, that's like felt quite radical to actually get out of my head and do something. To be, to move your body and like do something hard is like really vulnerable. And then when you get used to that vulnerability, it becomes powerful.
It's an interesting perspective on, as you say, getting out of our heads through our body. I mean, Nick and I have obviously done, well, maybe not obviously, but we've both done a shitload of self-work, and we've both been through programs and psychology and all sorts of stuff in various aspects of our lives. It's probably worked better for Nick than it has for me, I think. But I get up in my head a lot. I've always been, you put it earlier, Jimmy, very cerebral, I think. So, I'm a big thinker, deep thinker, overanalyze stuff. I've got a couple of tinfoil hats in the bedroom that I keep in the cupboard. And so most of the work I have done is about changing the way I think, changing the way my mind works, but that all involves using my mind and my brain. And so I found this fascinating, the whole getting out of my head through my body, because that seems really quite counter to what we've been taught through society, particularly Western society. And, I've exercised heavily for the last 15, 20 years. I've played sport. I love being outdoors. And so I do lots of physical stuff, but I don't seem to have tapped into that escape as much since I started doing the breath work and the cold exposure. And to me, it's just like, holy crap, this is like some magical little portal that I can just literally step out of everything just by spending 3 minutes in a tub of cold water. Like, is it something that many people are aware of? I know I'm asking a bit of a loaded question, but how come everything is so much about thinking and not so much about using our bodies to achieve mindfulness?
Well, I guess, that's, incredible what you said, the portal. It's like, it really is this portal back and forward between like, I'm in the world and I'm busy and everything's happening and I've got to deal with whatever it is that's happening out there. And then it's a portal back into like, oh, I can just get away from all this and be like in, for lack of a better word, in myself, even though when you're in that ice bath, it's like you're not actually there. And so we kind of think like, and a lot of people have this attitude towards the cold and the ice exposure. I think my way of teaching it is very much like you're in there to release whatever it is that you've accumulated and then bring in new energy. And people talk about things like manifesting and all this stuff. It's like, if you just say you love yourself every day in the mirror, you'll do it. Or if you sit and think about that Lamborghini long enough, you'll get it. But if you're adding all that crap onto like a shitty foundation in there, it's like you're just putting things into mud and they just sink in there. But what I found this ice bath and this breath work to do is it just clears the deck. It just gets you so deeply into your body and you can't avoid it. So there's this beautiful Eckhart Tolle quote. I don't know if you know Eckhart Tolle is like the little German Yoda. It was something like, it was a bit in a passage in a book that said, align with the inevitable isness of the present moment. And there was something about him saying the inevitable isness. So when you're in the ice bath, it's like, it's inevitable. It's like it's forced upon you. Like you can't be thinking about your email, what your boss said, all that kind of stuff, because your body's in survival mode and you start shivering and you get weird and you want to get out. Yeah, it's a surrender process. So a big part of it is teaching surrender in the face of all this sensation. Like, and you could call it stress, right? So it's like you're training yourself to deal with like a whole bunch of stress coming on you. But because it's not thoughtful stress, like we're talking about, it's not associated with like the mother-in-law staying for 3 months or like, I owe this much money for this or whatever. You're just like, so then your brain goes, okay, I have to turn off because I can't think my way out of this. And then when you start scanning the body and feeling it, and you're like, my right arm used to tense up. It's like my clicking finger. And I only realized that because in the ice bath, I stopped thinking and was just like, okay, let's see what's going on in the body. And when I stress out, I do this. and I was able to release that. And I've noticed that with so many people that come through the ice, like, I give prompts, but people find these on their own. There was a lady that she was really tense in there. I said, okay, relax your belly and just like allow yourself to breathe into it. And she said, oh, something popped, like a rib popped. And she'd had this, like a judo, she was like high up in judo or whatever. She was like really into it. And she'd had a cracked rib or something like 10 years ago and always had trouble with it. And she said when she released it, she felt like this release she'd never had before. And I think she realized that what she does is she holds herself in stress to brace for that rib. And then when she actually felt stress in her body and she released into it and let her belly be soft, that was the first time the rib just like popped into the right spot. And so we have these weird realizations in the ice because we're in this like quote unquote survival mode where it takes everything for you to just relax into it and go like, I'm not going to push against this. I'm going to let this cold in. And then once you're in there, there's this beautiful isness. It's like the portal. You're just kind of there, like you open your eyes and like the sun's shining and you can see birds and you're not stressed anymore. And you're not stressed about your body because it's adapted. So you're just sitting there, you're breathing normally and like, wow, I should be dead now. This should be like really suck. And I've let go. And then that's when you start to bring in good feelings. Like, well, how do I want to feel? I feel powerful right now. I feel like amazing or capable or joy. And you can just, once you get out, you circulate that in your body automatically and you feel really like great for the rest of the day. And so I can't remember what we're talking about, but it's something about getting out of your head and into your body.
Yeah,
it's like
using your body to tap into that. It seems counterintuitive because to change your thinking, we have to think differently. But doing this work is like using the body as sometimes I get in and it feels like my body has become a sledgehammer just to squash my brain and tell it to shut the fuck up. And I kind of like that because for me, it's 4 minutes that saves me, another 3 hours of psychotherapy or something. It's like, it's the ultimate hack. And I detest that in some ways, but it really does feel like a shortcut, especially for our listeners, busy people, stressed people, they've got lots going on. They don't have time to go and do, hour-long counselling sessions every week for the next 12 weeks to try and deal with all, as you said earlier, the mummy-daddy stuff, which I think is hilarious. This is almost like a bit of a shortcut.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's irritatingly simple and fast. And I think people don't really want to believe it, but it's like, people do things like climbing mountains without ropes to get that feeling. Or because I've been surfing, I've felt a similar thing where I was talking to a guy about it last week and he's like, that feeling when I'm paddling for the wave and it's picked me up and I'm just about to drop in, he's like, there's nothing, there can't be anything else there. It's just me and the wave. And through the process of doing that over an hour or so, I come out and I'm fresh again. That's what this ice bath is. It's like you're in survival, but it's low stakes survival. It's not something really intense. You don't have to jump out of an airplane or go and do, you don't have to go do drugs or even just drink to an excessive amount to feel like there's aliveness, like it's really intense aliveness, and it can be quite short. And afterwards it resets a lot of things. And, that maxim of like, this too shall pass is there can be a lot of things going on, but if you're processing it through your body and not thinking too much about it, you can actually open up space to look at it from a different angle or just adjust what really matters. Like, does it matter that person said that thing to me earlier? Not really. Like, I feel too good to worry about that now. And it just creates space. And it feels hacky. It does. Cause it's like, how can that be possible? You don't really want to believe it, but it's the same with the breath work, right? It's like, if you've got 12 minutes, you can do the Wim Hof YouTube online, and it's just creates spaciousness and like aliveness again. And when you're in that zone, things don't appear as stressful. And it's not like, oh, I don't care about anything anymore. It's almost the opposite. You care about stuff more that matters, and the other things will fall into place because you've essentially like upped your consciousness level out of like the shitty mud into like the clearer space, and everything under it just falls in. Like, you don't have to try to then, I've got to sort this out, I got 100 things on. You just go, all these things under here are going to work because I'm up here, and it's just going to happen. And that's the beautiful thing about this work is like, you figure things out about yourself without having to really dig deeply, because it gets thrown up at you by the ice or the breath. It just, there it is,
Jimmy, is it as simple as I'm just going and buying an ice bath, filling it up with water and ice and jumping in, and I'm all good. It's going to fix me just like that. Or is there a process here that we need to go through?
I'm such a like gray person where I go, yes, that's true, and also not true. So there's always truth in every statement and not. I'm not, you're not going to get me the person who's like, you got to do it for this many minutes. It's got to be this, and you got to do it this time. Like, I know that information, but what I found about people is over time, everyone's different and they need to experiment. But yes, there is ways to start that are going to be like supportive of the journey. So if you are thinking about ice bathing, I generally would recommend doing it with someone else, because there's this thing that happens when you get in there that you can't see. It's like when you first try an exercise and you do it really kooky, but you have no idea you're doing it, but everyone else is like, yeah, you're not even bending your legs. It's not a squat. You're just moving your back up and down. It's the same with the ice, because it is such an intense practice. You go into this weird, sometimes freak out mode, and you're doing things that aren't conducive. So having someone there with you who knows how to hold space for you and to work with you the breath and know the right cues is like, I mean, having a coach for anything, but especially with the ice is really good, because and I'm not trying to sell myself either, but it's like I can definitely see things about people where I go, try this on now, try that on now, do this. It's your breathing, slow your breathing down, keep going with that, because your brain, there's that like, what is it, craving and aversion. It is like the old Buddhist thing, and it's like your aversion to the ice will keep telling you, no, keep breathing more, no, get out. And it's like someone from the outside can look at you and go, you don't need to do that. You've one breath ago you were heading in the right direction, let's go back there. Or unwind the shoulders, do things like that, which you can't see you're doing. So that's number one. But in terms of like how hard it is to set up an ice bath, it's super simple. Like if you've seen the photos online, people just have these plastic tubs, and the way that we do it in the morning is we just bail ocean water in there. We throw about 9 bags of ice in there in winter, and that's definitely enough to get it started. But for people at home, there is like, I would recommend just starting with cold showers. Is like that's the baby step, and then you can even get like a bowl. And this is like a little tip, for people at home, it's very easy to do, and it's cheap, because ice can be expensive. Buying, that's why I do it in a group, because I don't have an apartment where I can set up the chest freezer. Mm-hmm. So also community, right? Community is like the number one thing. But if you've got a bowl, a salad bowl or something like that, you get half of a bag of 5 kilo ice. So like maybe even a third of that, put it in there and double that amount of water. And you just put your hands in there for a couple of minutes. And like, it might suck. You might only get it done for like 10, 15 seconds and be like, this is really terrible. But if you do that maybe every day for a week and you're diligent about it, it'll stay in longer. And then at some point you'll be like, oh, this is kind of okay now. And you can do it with your feet as well. And that also will just release adrenaline into the body. It gets the body adapted for the cold. Even just having the hands and the feet in there, you don't have to have the full ice bath to start with. Those things get the metabolism going. They get everything kind of adapted in this weird way. Even just putting cold water on your face for like, just hold your face under for like 10 seconds and come back up. Like those things can be really good starters to get you going. If you don't have a group near you, or there's no instructor, or there's nothing like that, it's like those little things help. Or getting in the ocean, that's for the ice. And then the breath work is like, there's so much breath work stuff on YouTube now. It's insane. Especially, I mean, the Wim Hof one's the easy one. I think it's like 12 minutes or something like that. But yeah, as always, I recommend doing it with someone who knows what they're doing, because it'll just take you into a different space.
I love that you've just hacked the hack for me. Thank you very much. I can do that.
What did you take away from it? What are you going to do?
For me, I can most definitely do the hands and feet thing in the middle of winter. I can absolutely throw myself into that discomfort and give that a go. Actually, when you were talking about the process, to me, that was like giving birth. You were describing completely giving birth to me, and the going into oneself and only being conscious of what was going on in my own body. And I think when you've explained that, I'm like, okay, this is fine. I can do this. It's not going to hurt half as much as that hurt. I can absolutely do this. So I'm already there with you. But to be able to do that with my hands and feet right now and get that process started, I'm really pumped for that while I figure out how to move forward in that. And I probably, where I wanted to come back to was the holding space, the vulnerability, sitting in that with someone, I think is really important, because a lot of stuff, I've done a lot of breath work, and I've seen through the breath work, particularly in groups, how much stuff can come up. I think it's really important, particularly at the beginning of your journey, to have the right kind of people around you to hold that space, to sit in that vulnerability with you, to help make you comfortable through that process as you start to move through some of that stuff that we all have that we need to process. Jimmy, do you think that that's an acquired skill? Like, I feel immediately comfortable with you. I'd come and sit and do something with you tomorrow. I feel, I don't feel that way about a lot of other people. Do you think that that's just part of who you are, or something that you had to learn as you went through your own journey, in terms of then others finding the right people for them to take them through at least the starting point for this?
And that's a very good point, because it's like, how do you find people that you trust? And unfortunately, there is a little bit of like trial and error to begin with, especially in breath work, because it's such an exploded thing at the moment. During COVID, everyone was learning about the breaths to calm themselves down and to feel good. So you're at home and, people are experimenting. And then as soon as people, because also higher up schools or instructors were like, I can't teach people, I can't make money, I can't do this stuff. So all of a sudden there was like a ton of online courses on how to facilitate breath work. And then everyone's a breath worker all of a sudden, which is fine. That's what it is. But then it's hard for people to kind of pick where they want to go. And yeah, it's, as far as finding someone, it is a little bit of experimenting, like finding local breath workers, or just kind of poking around on Instagram and just listening to videos, or just seeing. And I think that's really interesting that you kind of said that you feel comfortable around me, because I've found more so than giving people information, like, even I know the information, but it's like, it's holding space for them that has been the really special thing for me, because I've needed to do that for myself, or had other people do that for me in special moments where I've gone like, oh, this is what it is. Like, I should be coming out of my own experience, rather than someone coming up and touching me and giving me too much, like, do this and do that. It's like, you've got to actually allow people to go through it. And then when they are potentially in upset, because that can happen sometimes, just to be able to calmly be with them, especially in the ice, but also with breath work, because breath work is cumulative. You might be doing breath work in a live session for 25 minutes, and then you kind of pop and you have this moment where you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Like, all these emotions are coming, and just to have someone be there without trying to tell you what to do. And yeah, I think I learned that through my experience with some of the really high up instructors in Wim Hof. The old school ones are very much like hands off, and like, you can do this and this is how you do it, but they're not saying like, do XYZ steps and then do this and there's this technique. They're very much just like, they're just there with you, and you go through your own process, and you come out and you metabolize what you need, and you know what your next steps are, because just through a process of doing something for a while. But yeah, it's very hard, I guess, to find the right people. But then also, once you've done it a couple of times, you start trusting yourself, and then eventually you do kind of find it. That was a very vague answer to that question. I'm sorry, but yeah,
I got it.
And
it's perfect.
I've had some crazy experiences, not so much with breath work, but with ice, like, to go off on a tangent, like having to know that it was me that could do it all. So I went and did an expedition with Wim in Spain, which is just like incredible. If anyone has the money, the time, or a trigger finger on the mouse to get there in time to book a spot, highly recommend these. But by the final day, we were doing this hour-long ice bath where we're standing in there up to our thighs. So it wasn't fully submerged, it was just legs. And the half an hour was really hard. And after half an hour, I was like, okay, you can leave now, you can go away. And I was like, no, I think I've got this. And made it to the full hour. It's really beautiful because everyone starts humming and we're singing. It's like, you get the power of groups, and like, not forced, like, you guys stay in, you got to do this. It's just like, everyone's just creating this force field that keeps everyone in the right zone. But then when I got out, as soon as my feet touched the ground, I got this signal to my brain that was like, I'll never walk again. Because it was basically, I was walking with ice cubes. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't feel the ground. It was like, there was nothing there. And I could see my legs moving. And immediately, I'd only been out of the bath for about a second, and I was just like, oh my God. And one of the instructors came over and led me over onto the grass, and I just started sobbing uncontrollably straight away, just like embarrassingly, like torrential, like, I was like, why did I trust these people? Why did I think I could do this? I'll never walk again. It was like really intense. And I'm sitting there in the grass, and like, it's funny you mentioned birthing, because I was in the birthing position. I fully know the body just defaults when you're in extreme pain and upset into that birthing position. And Wim walks up to me and he looks me in the eyes and he keeps walking. I was like, no, Wim's not going to save me. Like, what am I going to do? And I was just like, dude, you got to do this for yourself for once. Like, you've got to actually, you have it in you. You always want someone else to, like, you're externalizing, like telling your mates about your breakups or doing this or whatever. It's like, just be able to be with your thing that you're suffering through and get through it on your own. So eventually when it all wore off and all the adrenaline was like circling and all the tears and stuff, I was quite embarrassed because I kind of did it in front of everyone. And, but my brain, like what we were talking about with the conceptualization, is like, I had this huge physical experience. And then afterwards I was like, well, that was more painful than my divorce. That was more painful than being bullied as a kid. That was more painful than all these things. Like, I think I just shook something out of me, like this level that I'd put on top of me that said, you're only allowed to feel this much. And I surpassed that with the ice. Like, I couldn't help it. It just happened to me.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I can have my heart broken a million times. I can take on way more things. Like, I'm just playing it so small in life. Like, it lifted the lid on that. And I think a lot of that is the same with breath work. You know, you start to reach levels where your nervous system, you've said, I only deal with this much upset before I get really angry and hot. And, you know, whatever happens to me, I don't want, and then you surpass that with the breath work without trying. And then you go, oh, I'm up to this new level now. I let some tears out. And it's like, okay, let's go. Like, I'm up here. This is how far away everything can be from me. It doesn't all have to be like this. Yeah. It was a really powerful experience, but having those people hold space for me, but also even Wim, which is just the weirdest thing, just going, yep, no, and keeping on walking. I was like, that was the biggest lesson for me ever. You know, it's like, you don't always have to baby everyone. Sometimes they got to have their thing and they've got to let it come up and go. And that's more important to them than you trying to get them out of the thing necessarily, depending on what it is, of course. If they're asking for help, you do. But if they're just in it, you got to kind of just be there with them and or move on, just walk past. I don't know. Yeah.
Make eye contact and keep walking.
Just let them suffer.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be my moment with Wim, you know, he's going to come and, you know, be my dad or something.
Yeah. Speaking of mummy daddy issues.
That's right.
Jimmy, do you find that women and men have a different experience through the breath and the ice? Like, is there a different approaches to it? Is that insightful into how each of us, you know, how Coxie and I both deal with stress differently based on our gender, or is it just universal across the board?
This is getting into real, like, you know, we have different bodies, right? But everyone has like these poles within them of like how you might call it more feminine or more masculine, the way that we deal with things. Sometimes we just keep ourselves in and we just deal with it. And then other times we'll like cry and like be a bit more spontaneous. And so that can happen within each person. But I found mostly, like, to generalize, of course, men are a little bit more like stoic about it. And you almost want to grab them and go like, just breathe a little bit, bring your, like, allow you to open up. You know, the world's not going to get you if you open up. And then with women, it's a little bit more like they want the support, like, come to me and please hold my hand. But then conversely, like, the men will also be quite stoic and they'll get through, as sometimes the women can be a little bit more like, it can be a little bit more like stirred up. But then also I've seen women just get in, like, I've never seen a man really do this, but I've seen women get in and just be in there straight away. It's like you mentioned, Nick, with the childbirth. It's like they have this knowing already of pain. You know, women have pain in their bodies, like, just from teenage years onwards, really, as a cycle. And so they have a different understanding. But it's like I've seen both from both sexes, really. And of course, there's things with women in like their cycles, and, you know, there's menopause and things like that. So men are a little bit more stable through, they can just do the same level that they do. But this is to generalize, in my ice bath group, it's actually mostly women, which I think now coming back, I'm realizing some things. It might be the space holding thing that they like about me, but like they were doing like 12 minutes this morning, like, you know, the older ladies, just like insane. And me and the other guy, there's only two of us guys there, we both did like 5 minutes. Like, yeah, that's enough. Like, we just get the top up. Whereas they're really just like, they're in there chatting and, you know, they're really like having the full experience. So yeah, it can be like really, really crazily different and also very similar. But yeah, men tend to like try and, I'm going to force my way through it. It's like, no, you need to open up. And women want you to come and help, but they need to find their own space, is what I've found. Like, just to know that they can do it without chatting and getting their friends around, and, you know.
And I asked that question for a reason, for our listeners benefit, and I think about the clients that Nick and I work with through the Tradiepreneur program, is we work with a fairly even mix of men and women, many couples, some individuals, and guys' response to stress and pressure and business and life and busyness and all that sort of stuff is obviously very different to many women, and it's not universal, but there is this difference between how they both approach stress and also how they both choose to process it and deal with it or not. And I think that's one of the big things that I certainly see with a lot of guys is almost a reluctance to even acknowledge that they are having those feelings of stress or overwhelm, whereas women are, and I think as you rightly put, women have pain in their body from teenage years for the rest of their lives, really, and so they're actually much more at peace with accepting and acknowledging that they're having this suboptimal experience or an undesirable experience, as most people see that side of themselves. And I think for a lot of guys, they just don't even know how to say, I feel like shit. It to accept that there's a very intellectual thing.
Yep. So there's like a roller coaster. And so women are more in touch with the seasons and the cycles and stuff like that. Men don't have that because we're just so the arrow, so to speak. So like to actually men have to more realize that there is cycles and that things pass. And that you can feel a certain way, and that's not erratic. That's just an emotion that you're feeling. And it doesn't mean it's going to last forever, because men also stay stuck in things and they're like, this is just me. I'm a stressed person, or at the moment this is going on. And if I get all my shit together, it'll be better. It's like, no, it just means you've got to do more. Whereas like and actually allowing the openness to like let go of things rather than using it as fuel to like keep going. It's like, oh, actually, if I let myself open up a little bit, and I do a practice like Wim Hof where I get to actually process and release, then I can come back more powerful, and I've probably dropped a lot of the unnecessary threads that are going. And I think that's super important. And that's, of course, for women in trade as well, because it's like, it's a very like, got to do the thing. It's got to be precise. It's got to be on time, and to actually relax back into that kind of femininity a bit, or just to like flush it out for both. It's just, yeah, it's really awesome. That's really what it is for me. It's not about, there's inflammation, there's all the health benefits, there's all those things, but I think they come from the top down. It's like we're using, once the mind is right and you have gaps, and it's not like you have to be, I was going to say Gandhi, that's a really bad example, but you don't have to be walking around being like, the guru and very peaceful and namaste everyone and all this stuff. You can go straight back into your hectic life and kick goals and be super busy. But if you have practices that you can wedge in there that are like Wim Hof is a bit of a nuke button where you can actually just and then come back again. It's like, it's super, super good to flush, to have those like a big flush valve that you can come back. And that's what makes it addictive if you start getting really rigorous with it, because your life just starts to get a little bit more fluid and not so like rigid, and not in a bad way where you're like, oh, now my business is, I did Wim Hof once and now I'm emotional and my business is in the toilet. It's like, it doesn't work like that.
Turn into a snowflake.
It's a practice.
Yeah, it exactly doesn't happen like that. If anything, you get more powerful. You get more like, I know what I need and what I want, and the rest of it's just noise coming from the outside.
Jimmy, can you take us right back to describing a typical first time? And I understand that it's very different for everybody, but there must be some, I guess, processes that the body goes through, or that we all tend to go through, just so those people listening at home that might still be a little bit scared have a better understanding of what that might look like.
Sure. And I guess we're talking about the ice because that's kind of like the thing, right? Yeah. So what happens to the body is like, the first thing when you get in is there's an activation, right? It's like your body's on. So you're not going into a peaceful state. You're going into a survival state because it's like, it's really cold. So everybody goes, okay, what do we got to do? We got to release a little bit of adrenaline. We want everything to be going and to be full systems ahead. And when you get into the ice, it does tend to take your breath away because of that. So you're sitting there, you're like, oh, this is what's going on, and so that's the body's first kind of reaction, is to like maybe freak out and to want to get more, so to cycle more oxygen. But actually what you want to do in there is to control the breathing. So that big cyclic Wim Hof breathing that happens in the breath work, it's actually the opposite in the ice. You want to get in and extend your exhales so that you're telling your body like, we're relaxing. until it gets to the point where it's adapted. And so that can take a little bit of time with people. But the main thing I tell people when they get in is like, I like a little breath in through the nose. So you're not gasping it in. It's just like, and then gentle out of straw. And so what people can then, they get in and go, you said to do this. And it's like, no, you want to actually do this. And it might feel like it's not working, but each little step, each breath, which feels like an eternity in there, gets you to the point. And then when I can see people's breathing are okay and they're breathing just like they normally are, then I say, okay, let's go back into the body, because it's very much like this. And I say, let's unwind it and open it up, which feels counterintuitive because you're letting more cold in, you're letting go of more control. But that's how you get to that Zen. You want to keep getting to that place where you're just scanning the body, relaxing the muscles. And if ever you get in your head, go back to the body, see what's going on. Oh shit, I tightened up my leg. I can open up my posture. I can relax a bit more. And what happens is like your cardiovascular system will close up because it's trying to keep all the warm blood in the core and create metabolism in here to keep you going. So like your fingers get quite intense in the feet because they're like the little digits that pick up the cold the quickest. So the vessels in here close down. It can become painful. So that a lot of people get stuck on their hands. It's either you can take your hands out, and do a little prayer to create a heat thing. Or you can put them under here or behind the knees, if it's really intense. I don't make people put their hands in. That can be a process they do over several ice baths if it's really intense. And the same with the feet. You can't do much with the feet, but it's just like, once you've done that, keep scanning the body. You don't get stuck on the painful bits, just move around. And that can take a couple of ice baths to figure out. But generally for first timers, it's always like getting them in up to the shoulders because you don't want to cut your body in half. And it's like half of you's warm, half of you's cold. It doesn't help. It makes it worse.
Yep.
Sit back and all the way in here, working on the breathing, calming the breathing down until I can see, or that person's felt themselves that their breathing is starting to get regulated. And then it's relaxing the muscles, like working through. And there's a psychological aspect to that, which is like surrendering tightness and letting the cold in, because you got to let in the stress or let in the thing that you don't want. Yep. And then once you do that, that's when the power comes afterwards, where you get out and you're like, oh, I'm fully relaxed and I'm killing it in here. I'm in my Zen. And that's a 2-minute, 3-minute process for the first time that someone will get in. And usually it'll be like, I can see if someone's struggling almost, you want to keep them in there a little bit longer. So they do get to the point where they are actually like accepting, they're like, I get it. And then each ice bath after that, they kind of pick a little bit of a longer time or less. And some people stay at like 2 or 3 minutes for a year. It can be, some people just go straight up to 7, 12 minutes. Everyone's different how they treat it. But yeah, that's kind of most people's first time.
Yeah.
Mostly working on the breathing and letting them know that it's okay. We're safe. You're okay. You're okay. You're safe. It's okay.
You're not going to die.
You're not going to die, because it can feel like that. You're like, oh, it's that full activation. That stress is coming in. And then each time after that, more things open up psychologically. And then you start working with the spiritual aspect of it.
Fascinating. Is there a process then when you're getting out? Because like you've just described, and we're talking two very different extremes, an hour standing in freezing water compared to 3 minutes. I imagine still, no, you've not sold it to me, that's for sure. I still think the body would react quite differently as you get out, with numbness in your feet particularly. Is there a way? My guess is getting into something warm is probably the worst thing you could do because of the two extremes, the temperature and the reaction that would create in your body. But is there a process?
That was so well asked. It would almost like seem like you know the answer.
I've read it off my book.
Classic. No, yeah, of course, because the body goes in this whole process of adapting in one certain direction. What you don't want to do is get out and suddenly like kind of blast it with hot air. And, you don't want to go get straight in the car and put on the hot conditioning or go get in a warm shower, because all that whole cardiovascular system has adapted to you being super cold. And so if you start blasting yourself with warmth, or you chuck your clothes on, basically you're reverse insulating yourself. Like you're telling your body that, oh, we can let this cold blood back in. And that's when you start getting after-drop, which is when the cold starts to get in the core and you start shivering and getting a little bit like forgetting, it's the onset of hypothermia. So what you actually want to do is warm up naturally. So you'll see people in the freezing cold weather, they just got out of the ice bath. They got a red mark on their skin up to here. And they're just doing these movements, in the sun because they're like really happy. And it just keeps you active. So first time I'd recommend doing at least 10 minutes of kind of warm up afterwards before you even consider even putting a shirt on.
Yeah.
And Wim has this thing called the horse stance. So it's just basically getting your thighs wide and going into a low stance, like you're doing like not a squat, but like if you were to do, I don't know how to explain this without getting up on my couch and doing it, but like your legs look like that. So there's a lot of tension in the thighs.
Yeah.
And then just moving the upper body like this. And it just keeps everything gentle and moving. So if you were to get out and go for a run, once again, you'd stimulate the body too much and you get cold and like you'd start getting a little bit wigged out. So you just want something really kind of still, but just gentle movement. That's why that horse stance is really beautiful. And people can generally like after a while or so, you just go, okay, I think it's time to like maybe take the swimmers off and put on a shirt now. And then, okay, I feel fine. And I put on a jacket. If you put that jacket straight on, it's like you can really reverse insulate yourself and you start getting cold. People are there with their huge jackets on going, I'm freezing, Jimmy, what's going on? It's like, take all this shit off. You put it on too fast. You got to actually, and your metabolism does lots of work. You don't want to speed that up. You just want to kind of enjoy it. And when you get out of the ice bath, it's very, it's not likely that you're going to feel colder outside than you were in the ice. So It could be like blowing a gale and like 10 degrees and you'll be out there like, oh, I'm warmer out here than I was in there. And then eventually you start to feel it. But for most people, it's about 15 minutes. I recommend after a 3-minute ice bath, start testing clothes and doing things like that. Unless, of course, maybe you're in the snow or something and you might need to actually rug up a bit. But yeah, there's definitely a process to re-warming so that everything can kind of dilate again slowly. You don't want to trick it. Yeah, that metabolism too. You want that burning. You want the body to work. That's kind of how it gets the thing going. You don't want to artificially kind of circumnavigate that.
It sounds to me like there are quite a few mistakes that could be made if you don't start this process with somebody who can take you through it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I gain nothing by saying that, and I legitimately mean it. I think there's a tendency when you see so much of this on social media, and I'm probably thinking about my children. I've got lots of 20-something-year-old children who they want to jump on the cool thing that everybody's observing and doing, much like you described earlier, Jimmy.
Sorry, I thought you meant you have lots of 20-year-old children yourself.
I do. I've got 5 of them from 19 to 27, 19 to 27.
You got a few twins or like?
No, they're just
wow.
year after year.
Hats off. That's incredible.
Thank you. And, you know, I'm watching them and observing them, loving this idea of jumping into an ice bath. And I'm thinking, okay, well, as a parent and with the benefit of some age, I understand there's got to be processes to this to make it successful. And there's got to be processes to ensure that we don't trigger unwanted results in our body, I guess, through, you know, doing exactly what you're saying, going and warm myself straight up. And then I'm in this really weird space for the rest of the day. So I think it's important that we point out that at least in the beginning, there is a great deal of benefit to having somebody help take you through that process.
100%.
Help get you the results that you're looking for.
And I sometimes skip that because it's my natural mode. So I you know, skip the things that I think are obvious that everyone's like, oh, I didn't know I should be doing that. But definitely doing it with someone else, you know, and only doing 2 to 3 minutes, like max to start with, because you don't want to overdo it and you just start to generally like bite off a little bit more, because what can happen is you can go, oh no, I'm sweet in here because your body's fully adapted. And then it might be 15 minutes and you get out and you're like, I'm not fucking sweet. Why did I think I should? What, you know, I've gone too far. And then you get the capital T trauma, which is like, I don't ever want to get in the cold anymore. And like, you know, now I've got this aversion to it because I really like for 2 hours afterwards, I forgot what my name was and where my wallet was. And like, I didn't know what was going on, because that can happen. It affects the brain a bit, you know, like that mild hypothermia. So it's actually like really hard to get into that state if you do very gentle cold exposure in terms of like short amount of time, then a lot of time afterwards for warming yourself up and not rushing to go do anything straight away. Like, don't do it. Oh, I've got 20 minutes. I'm going to have an ice bath and do 10 minutes and then have 10 minutes. But then like you're still freezing cold and you got your jacket on, you're trying to get onto a Zoom or do whatever. And you're not really actually looking after your body properly. There needs to be time afterwards to warm up. And that's not really ever talked about. It's always the thing, like, how do I get through the ice bath? But it's almost as important to understand that you need time afterwards. And that's all part of it. That's all still the experience of the ice bath, is that time after where the body's still a little bit shivery. And, you know, you might be sitting at your desk doing your work later and you got a little bit, oh, my feet are still cold, and just becoming present again that, okay, like, let's take a second with that. And I have to be in my body a bit more.
I love it. You made it's me. I'm kind of feeling really enthusiastic about going and doing my hands and feet in cold water at lunchtime now. I'll send you.
Try your feet first, I reckon. I find with most people, feet are easier because they're at the bottom of your body and you can just sit there and be distracted with something else. And then, set a timer for 5 minutes and just see what happens. And then, because the hands can be, that gets people,
I bet.
Yeah. So try the feet first.
Pretty intense. And I still put them in, but you were mentioning before, Jimmy, it's that opportunity, I guess, to defocus from that and just allow that to be and then notice some other areas of my body, which has become a bit of a part of my, and I'm early stages with it, but part of that mastery. I love mastering new things or revisiting old things and seeking that sort of pursuit of kind of what you were saying before. How can I do this better, or how can I be better? And so I find those quite exciting opportunities, which pulls me back into the practice, because then it's like, oh, I want to do that again and see if I can notice this or improve that or relax my shoulders a little more. So that kind of becomes my motivation to do things more and more and more, and not to beat oneself up and go, I didn't do this, or damn it, my hands were hurting and I got stuck on that last time. It's kind of just choosing how to look at those things as either a failure or an opportunity for excitement to go and do it again. And I think that carries over into our listeners' businesses and their daily practice. So often we just, Nick and I work with people who feel like they failed at stuff, or that they're a failure, and they get beaten up and downtrodden about not getting it right, and they missed an opportunity. But the opportunity they missed was the one to be excited about. Well, you know what? I screwed that up. So I'm friggin' stoked to go and have another crack at that and get another job and see if I can price that better. And I feel like that's been one of the big things for me out of doing both the breath work and the ice. And I'm excited to go shopping on Marketplace for Coxie for a freezer. Because I know she's got room in her house for a chest freezer.
I do. I really can't say no.
Straight from the hands to the ice freezer. I love that. Yeah. And that's how it works. Some people are just like, they've had one ice bath and they're like, I'm getting a freezer tomorrow,
I did exactly that.
Yeah,
it's like, this
that.
is sick.
Yeah. But I love what you said about that.
It was awesome.
Is because with my hands, like I really freaked out, and that was when I had to have instructors around me. They're like, it's okay, because Wim was like 2 people away from me and he's got his hand in there, and I'm like, oh, Wim's gonna think I'm a wuss. Like all this weird shit you think about. Everyone's looking at me. It took me 3 goes of putting my hand in and finally surrendering my hand. It's probably not a great thing for the listeners to hear, because I was like, I don't care if my hand falls off and they got to take me to hospital. I'm here for this shit. And then at some point I started laughing maniacally because I realized like it had been 2 minutes and my hand was still in there. But the main reason for that is because I was just like, I let go of the hand and I started like, oh, my posture's not right. And I was focusing on my squat. Yeah. And then being able to feel the pain in the hands, but actually just diffuse that out through the body. So don't stay with the thing that's irritating. And this is a life lesson, right? Like whatever you focus on becomes the thing that opens up to be the biggest problem. It's like, okay, my hand's hurting or uncomfortable right now, but can I focus on the rest of my body that needs attention and just breathe through it? And then eventually the hand just is okay. And I'm struggling to like labor an analogy, but there's so many things like that in life where it's like sometimes we make things bigger than they are because we just focused on the issue that was bad, like you were saying, and starting to go through this process of like being unattached to the thing and being a little bit addictive and curious. And an ice bath is a really like low stakes way of doing that, in terms of like, you just get some ice in a bowl and you're just experimenting with yourself. And as long as you don't decide to beat yourself up, like I had this thing with surfing for the first month. I was like, I'm not popping up properly. I can't do it. The waves suck. I should be over there, blah, blah, blah. And then I noticed my friends doing it. I was like, that's really ugly when people do that. And I was like, you know what? Surfing is going to be a place where I never judge what I'm doing. I never assess. And then all of a sudden now I love surfing and I'm like making adjustments because I feel them in my body. And I never go, I had a bad surf, I had a great surf. And so I think a lot of that I've learned through the ice as well, as you were saying. And so now I can apply that. I'm not quite applying it to my business yet because I'm too attached to the money and all those kind of things. Like that's, I'm trying to work it up through levels. But surfing's the first thing I've ever done where I've applied that principle of like, oh, I'm in an ice bath now. Don't focus on the shitty thing. Just like, I love being out here. I'm going to keep going. And it's through doing thousands of this thing that I'll find out what it is that needs to happen, not just in that one time that I did it.
Love it. Jimmy, I'm going to ask you my favourite question, mate. If you had 1,000 trade business owners in a room, what is one piece of advice you would love to leave them with?
Oh, gosh. Advice. 1,000 trade owners. So if I took it from being trade people to just being people, because who knows what trade people need, but I'm guessing they're very busy. They got a lot on. I'd say find the thing that those little moments, the practice that gets you out of the busy that's for you, and make that really important. And that's so easy to say because it can take years to figure out what it is. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's like sometimes it takes a lot of mucking around with different stuff. But like if it's the ice baths, if it's the breath, if it's just putting on some music and dancing while you're making the dinner, if it's like 15 minutes of meditating, if it's journaling, like make sure you do that fucking thing, because when life gets hard, if you drop all those things, life's just going to get harder. Like you need to create space to have those things that actually nourish you, is like a little bit of a soft word for it. Even it's just like that flush you out and bring in power. Like we need that to get out of the thing or whatever's going on and get into a space of just like into a void where there's nothing for a bit, just to reset the whole computer and be like, okay, I'm alive. I'm still good. Let's go again. I think that's so important. I found that the number one thing in my life at the moment is finding those things.
Love that. Thanks, Jimmy. Now, for our listeners who are going, okay, let's do this. Let's stick my feet or my head or whatever into some cold water, or go and breathe like a maniac and get all trippy. If they happen to want to check you out, mate, what's the best place for them to find you?
So probably the old Instagram. And yeah, so my Instagram is at Jimmy, JIMMY .Tranter, TRANTR. That's my last name. And I go by Breathe Deep, because it's like, I'm starting to build a business too, and I don't know what I'm doing. That's my thing. But yeah, and I do Wim Hof workshops in Sydney. So unfortunately, if you're a bit further afield, like there's people around, maybe I can, if you contact me, I can link you up with them. And I also do retreats, and, you know, I'm available to do things with people if they want to bring me out to do this work with them and their groups. I love doing that. So yeah, I think Instagram is probably the easiest one. It's I'm on there the most, unfortunately, but yeah.
At Jimmy.Tranter.
That's the one.
Done. Well, mate, thanks heaps for your time this morning. I think you said you had a surf this morning, so you're obviously pretty chilled. Ice bath. I did the ice bath on the breath, yeah. Yep, cool. Yeah. Appreciate your time, mate. Good to see you again. I love listening to you talk about this stuff. You did an amazing workshop with our tradiepreneur fellas in Sydney earlier in the year, in the middle of winter. And the spin-off from that has actually been amazing, mate. So, you know, testament to you leading a bunch of blokes and getting them to breathe and do all that stuff. So Jimmy's the real deal, folks. Go check him out and give it a crack. Let us know if you do. We'd love to hear from you listeners. If you have a good experience or a different experience to that, give us your feedback. Otherwise, Jimmy, thanks again, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Loz. Thanks, Nick. It was awesome. You guys are very gracious hosts, and it's been great to chat. And if any of these guys have any feedback or any of their journey, I love to hear that. I feel like I hogged a lot of the airway, but I would really love at some point to hear about their journeys and what they're doing. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Pleasure.
You've been listening to the Tradies in Business podcast with Warwick Bidwell and Nicole Cox. Find out more about today's guest, tools for your trade business, and other cool stuff at tradiesinbusiness.com.au.